Chapter 11 of An English Girl's First Impressions of Burma. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Carol Fullerton Samsell at clonesoflangston.com. An English Girl's First Impressions of Burma by Beth Ellis. Chapter 11. Sport. In Burma, the tiger story takes the place occupied by the fish story in this country, and is stamped, I suspect, with the same unblushing characteristics. Judging from the tiger stories I heard, I could come to no other conclusion that the Anglo-Indian is possessed of amazing nerve and ingenuity, qualities useful to him alike in the exploit and in the telling of it. I heard him with ever-increasing interest and wonder. The tiger is the favourite theme, though he is but of small account whose chronicle does not also embrace some experiences in the pursuit of the elephant, the bear, and other fearful wildfowl indigenous to the country. Most men own to being a little chary about elephant hunting, I found, but our friend the policeman appeared to have shot them like snipe. At first I was rather inclined to make light of elephant shooting. They are such exceedingly large animals that I thought even I could hardly fail to bag one, if I got him broadside on, but the policeman set me right on that point. From his explanation, I gathered that the elephant is invulnerable save only in one vital part, a spot behind the ear, and the sportsman, according to my narrator, must be as dead on that spot as Homocea. My informant also told me terrible stories of how the elephant will turn on his pursuer and trample on him, or tear him in pieces with his tusks, and he gave me further such blood-curdling descriptions of the terrifying noise made by an approaching herd of elephants crashing through the jungle, and trumpeting in their rage, that I felt devoutly thankful that I was visiting this particular district. The wild elephants of the neighbouring jungle, in their almost human intelligence, recognise the danger to themselves of conduct other than the most retiring and unprovocative character, in a locality where the peace was preserved by such an ever-threatening nemesis as our policeman. Bears, too, our policeman had frequently hunted, and many a hair-breadth escape had he effected by running uphill (bears cannot run uphill, you know), or swinging from tree to tree and performing other acrobatic feats which the bear was too heavy to attempt with success. On one occasion he said he had been overtaken by the bear, and his left arm chawed in 14 places. I forgot why the bear couldn't be content with one spot, and how he protected himself from the animal's further attentions. But he didn't mind the bear so much as the well-meant efforts of his companion, who, the hero of the episode complained, stood afar off and poured in a devastating fire, directed in a distracted and indiscriminate manner at him and the bear alike. Many and varied indeed were the dangers through which this seemingly fearless hunter had passed unscathed. Several tigers visited the neighbourhood during my visit, and caused great excitement among the men at the club, who thought nothing of sitting up all night in an uncomfortable tree over an unsightly kill, in hope of compassing the animal's undoing. Often, alas, they were doomed to disappointment. On one occasion, when my brother and a friend were awaiting a tiger's approach, a mist gathered round them, effectually obscuring everything from their sight. So there they were, obliged perforce to sit in darkness, not daring to descend and, of course, unable to see, and cheered by listening to the tiger comfortably devouring its prey within a few yards of their ambush. The engineer, when he heard this story, was for patenting an electric flashlight, which could be turned on to light the sportsman when the tiger was comfortably settled down to his meal. But this original suggestion was ungratefully rejected, much to his disappointment. But one afternoon the Thuggee brought him word that a large tiger had been marked down in the neighbouring jungle, and a beat was arranged for the following day. Then it was that the policeman earned our undying gratitude by proposing that we ladies, who had been behaving of late in an exemplary manner, should for once be allowed to accompany the sportsman, to see the great sight of our lives, a tiger shoot. I doubt whether the suggestion met with the entire approbation of the other males. But as the policeman was organising the beat, and as we all promised to be very good and obedient, they agreed reluctantly to take us. Women, perhaps naturally, are considered very much de trop on these occasions. A tiger shoot is a serious, sometimes a dangerous business, and female frivolities and nerves would decidedly be embarrassments. I heard a story of a girl, reputed to be a great sportswoman and a good shot, who accompanied her male friends upon one of these expeditions. Platforms had been built for the sportsmen in the trees in the line of the beat, and she shared one with a man who was more accustomed to shooting and hunting than to the society of the other sex, whom he held in much greater awe than any wild animal, however dangerous. When the tiger made its appearance, the girl promptly fainted, and her poor companion spent a most unhappy 10 minutes between the unconscious girl and the enraged tiger, being far more alarmed at the former. However, to return to my story, when we had given assurances that we never fainted, or had hysterics, or grew tired, and had promised faithfully not to move a muscle, not to speak a single word, not to disobey an order, and above all not to want to shoot, the men folk graciously allowed us to accompany them. But it was not to create a precedent. How excited we were, and how nervous! A seat in the tree did not appear to me to offer much security against the tiger's attack, however high it might be. Tigers, I had always been told, are near relations to cats, and I knew cats climb trees. When I nervously breathed these doubts to the policeman, he solemnly assured me that tigers will not climb, and by standing on their hind legs can only reach up about 14 feet. But this did not convince me, for had I not seen in my nursery days, and early impressions are lasting ones, brilliantly coloured pictures of tiger shoots, wherein the tiger was invariably depicted leaping into the air, or climbing fiercely up the side of an elephant, while the nervous occupant of the howdah peered cautiously over the edge. Was I to ignore the lessons of my youth? I can only explain this inconsistency by suggesting that tigers may have changed their habits with the advance of civilization. Nothing was talked of that evening but tigers and tiger shooting. The policemen and other local sportsmen were in great request, and their stories were listened to with an interest and belief which I should think quite astonished them. Even to the village did the excitement spread, for the love of sport is as prevalent among the Burmans as among Englishmen, and the natives are well paid for serving as beaters. Early in the morning the hunting party assembled in our compound, and after partaking of a cheery chota hazri we set out, a merry cavalcade consisting of 7 men and 3 women, and accompanied by a miscellaneous collection of servants and native shikaris. It was one of those fresh, cool, delicious mornings that make one feel inclined to sing with Pippa. The mornings at 7, the hillsides dew pearled. God's in his heaven, all's well with the world. In spite of qualms regarding the ordeal before us, we enjoyed that early ride, and we were a happy, hungry crew when we arrived at the jungle village, whither breakfast had already been dispatched. We found everything ready, prepared by the club khansuma and his staff of silent, well-trained Lugalays, as we breakfasted in the Punji Kong itself, surrounded by images of Gautama, by sacred pictures and bells, shaded by lovely groups of bamboos, and watched from afar by an interested crowd of young Burmans, whose shaven heads and yellow robes showed them to be the Punji's pupils. But we were not allowed to linger too long in idleness, discussing the merits of the chicken and ham, the muffin and toast, and the strawberry jam, to say nothing of luscious pineapples, incomparable bananas, differing as much from the banana we meet in England as chalk from cheese, the much vaunted mangosteens, the objectionable, from my way of thinking, custard apple, and the 100 other delicacies which our generous host had provided for our delectation. I had scarcely exchanged 3 words with the pineapples, and had only a bowing acquaintance with the plum cake, when the doughty policeman gave the word to start. It was really extraordinary how the presence of danger and responsibility affected the bearing of our policeman. The change came on quite suddenly, in the middle of breakfast, and was maintained till evening. He was transformed from a jovial, talkative personage to one sombre and morose, refusing to utter a word more than was absolutely necessary, greeting all observations with a discouraging frown or shake of the head, and in all his movements and actions displaying the impressive characteristics of Hawkeye and the other Indian hunter, friends of one's youth. We ladies were immensely impressed, and did our best to imitate his severe expression and noiseless stalking gait as closely as possible. Perhaps we presented rather a weird appearance, stealing along with harassed, stern, set faces, and cautious steps like stage pirates, but concluding that it was the proper role to adopt on such an occasion, we adopted it. Outside the Kong we met the beaters, a picturesque group in their bright coloured dresses, armed with sticks, cans, whistles, and everything sufficiently noisy to rouse Shere Khan from his noonday sleep. These beaters were dispatched under the direction of a native shikari to commence their work about half a mile to the westward, while we went to take up our position to the east of the rumoured position of the tiger. By this time the sun was up, and it was becoming very hot. For about half an hour we stole along in single file through the jungle. Half the men went before us to part the tangled bushes. The remainder brought up the rear, lest one of us should be lost, a possible and very unpleasant prospect in jungle so thick that it was impossible to see a yard around. We were very silent, partly from excitement, partly because silence was advisable, for who could tell what sleeping inhabitant of the jungle we might pass within a few yards. At last our leader judged that we had penetrated far enough. He halted the party and assigned to each gun its position. We ladies were each confided to the care of a good shot, and repaired with our respective protectors to the trees appointed for us by our leader. After some original research into the difficulties of tree climbing, especially tree climbing when the tree has no branches within 5 or 6 feet of the ground, and the unpleasant sensation of missing one's footing and slithering down the trunk, I at length, with the aid of much pulling, pushing, and other forcible assistance from my companion, attained my perch, and my protector climbed to a position in a tree close to mine. We had no platform to sit upon, but perched on the most convenient branches available. A branch of a tree is not the most comfortable seat in the world, and before the day was over I had ceased to envy the birds of the air, who make their habitations among the branches. After all the sportsmen were settled in their relative positions, about 100 yards apart, a weary time of waiting ensued. No one spoke. Everywhere around us were the mysterious humming, rustling sounds of the jungle, and far away to the westward we heard the faint noise of shouting and belaboured tom-toms, which told us that the beaters had commenced their work. The strain of excitement was terrible. I measured the distance between my feet and the ground, and calculated that, my tree not being very high, the tiger would experience little difficulty in reaching me. I mechanically drew up my feet, and tightened my hold on my sun umbrella. I remembered my boardship companions had assured me that poking an animal in the eye is very effective, but I didn't feel much confidence in this advice, nor did I feel much confidence in my oft-tried and much vaunted presence of mind. Absence of body would have comforted me more. I peered up among the branches and decided where I would place my feet if a sudden flight to higher regions should be necessary. Then I came to the conclusion that I didn't like tiger shooting at all. I glanced at my protector. He looked cool and alert. He is one of those men who appear absolutely uninterested in all that is going on until the supreme moment arrives, when they wake up suddenly and distinguish themselves, after which they relapse again into their former indifference. I regained my courage at sight of his coolness, and listened. Intense stillness around and behind us. Even the jungle had ceased to whisper. Everything seemed waiting in eager expectancy. But before us, drawing ever nearer and nearer, were the beaters, rattling sticks and cans, whistling, shouting, and playing on tom-toms, while between them and us, aroused from its heavy sleep, slinking away from the noise and disturbance, was what? The possibilities of a jungle drive were endless. Suddenly the high grass beneath my tree parted. Now for it, I think. But no, it is only a Yi, hurrying away with scared eyes from the unknown danger behind. It may escape today. Its enemy, man, is after bigger game. Ever nearer drew the beaters. Will it ever end, I whisper? But what was that? A loud report close to my ear. Something flashes past in the grass below. There is a loud roar of pain and fury, and then all is over except the shouting. For a few moments we waited in astonishment that it is all over so quickly, and in doubt if the animal be really dead. Then everyone tumbled simultaneously from their perches and hurried to the spot. There lay the tiger, quite dead, but looking so lifelike that while I put my hand in his mouth, or felt his cruel claws, I was conscious of a half fear lest he should be only shamming, and should come to life again with a sudden spring. The beautiful skin was uninjured, save where the bullet had entered the spine, and as we looked at him, the very emblem of strength and beauty lying there, slain without even a fight for life, I think we all felt a little pity. But pity soon gave way to triumph. The beaters arrived and crowded around the tiger, laughing and chattering, mocking the animal which had held them in such terror while he lived, and trying to steal his whiskers, which the Burmans value as charms. But we soon found we were hot, thirsty, and tired, so we set out on our return journey to Remyo, the beaters carrying our victim in triumph fastened on a long bamboo. News of our success had preceded us, and as we approached the village, we were met by an immense crowd of admiring natives, in that condition of giggling and jabbering excitement to which only a crowd composed largely of Madrasis can attain. So persistent were the attacks made upon the tiger's whiskers, that it became necessary at last to tie his head up in a bag, and in that undignified condition he was borne home and deposited safely in the club compound, where during the day he was visited and admired by every inhabitant of the station. Thus ended my first and only tiger shoot. How I wish I could electrify my readers with descriptions of expeditions wherein I myself would appear as the heroine, shooting tigers and performing other moving exploits by flood and field. But it may not be. The eager search after truth which has been so noticeable lately among the British public restrains such interesting flights of fancy, and in these days romancers who would display their quality to an appreciative audience must address themselves to the Marines or to the British Association. There is endless variety of game in the neighbourhood of Remyo. Snipe are almost as common as sparrows at home. Partridges, peacocks, jungle fowl, yi, and hares all abound, and many an enjoyable shooting expedition is undertaken, sometimes with, sometimes without, the excuse of business in the district. Well provided with ammunition, food, drink, rugs, and bedding, the Anglo-Indian sets out for 2 or 3 days' sport, wandering from place to place, sleeping in the open-sided zayats near the Pungi Kangs, and spending the day in the jungle, in eager search after the Englishman's great desire, something to kill. Some of the native shikaris who accompany these expeditions are splendid men. They are very silent, very uninterested in, even contemptuous of, things not connected with sport, but devoted to their profession, and as keenly excited, as delighted at success, or disappointed at failure, as any good sportsman all over the world, and possessing moreover a knowledge of the habits and customs of the jungle folk scarcely surpassed by Mowgli himself. A form of sport much indulged in by the Shan chiefs in the past, but which has been strenuously discouraged, was collecting heads. The last exponent of the game dwelt in the hills on the Shan state border, and was the hereditary leader of a large tribe of men as fierce and savage as himself. He was an ancient chief, proud of his race, his power and position, proud too of his home, and above all proud of his wonderful bodily strength. Many and marvellous are the stories told of his extraordinary doings. On one occasion, unarmed, he fought and killed a tiger, clinging to its throat until he throttled it. He bore the marks of the contest, huge scars upon his head and throat and chest, until his dying day. It was his custom, as doubtless it had been the custom of his ancestors and of many of their neighbours, to descend periodically from his mountain heights alone, and spend a few weeks in the neighbouring plains, engaged in his favourite hobby of collecting heads. He was not particular what heads he collected, but he preferred human ones when he could get them. He would remain in the plains for a while, waylaying, hunting, and slaying as many of his fellow creatures as he could meet with, occasionally perhaps varying the sport by killing a tiger. And at last, when he grew for the nonce weary of this amusement, he would return in triumph to his tribe, and display to their admiring gaze his ghastly spoils. The placid natives suffered his hostile inroads with that fatalism with which they regard all misfortune. But one day the chief made a slight mistake by adding to his collection the head of an Englishman, who was no doubt poaching in the chief's country, and for this departure from the accepted rules of the game he paid penalty. A detachment of soldiers was dispatched, who soon scattered the tribe and captured the offender. I met the subaltern who had been in charge of the escort, which brought him down to the plains, and he described to me the desperate efforts the fierce old man made to escape. He was bound hand and foot, watched day and night by 4 men, and his bonds were inspected every hour. On one of these inspections it was discovered that the ropes were frayed and gnawed half away, but his efforts were of no avail. Though he had the strength of a giant, he could do nothing against such overpowering odds. When at length they reached the plains, he turned to have a last look at the vanishing shadows of the hills, which no doubt he had loved with that silent, passionate love felt for their home by the inhabitants of all mountainous countries, and after a final desperate effort to kill himself, he suddenly seemed to relinquish all hope, and resigned himself stolidly to his fate. His defiance and strength seemed to pass away with that last sight of his beloved hills, and a broken-spirited, weak, helpless old man was all that remained. They brought him to Rangoon, and banished his old, worn-out body to the Andaman Islands, but his proud, fierce spirit fled back with that last look at the hills, and haunts the wild regions where he loved to roam. End of chapter 11.